Hey guys, do you believe that the dead have the ability to send texts and make phone calls? Well, my guest tonight, William J. Hall, has written a book on the subject, and he's going to be here to talk about it. See you in about 5 minutes. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust, turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. How is everyone today? Excuse me, my allergies are really, really bad. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. Welcome to California Haunts Radio. We broadcast Sunday through Friday every week without fail. Anyway, I'll be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team, based out of Sacramento, California. You can find us at californiahaunts.org or the radio show at californiahauntsradio.com. You can also find me on Facebook. You can find California Haunts on Facebook, me on Facebook as well. And I own the paranormal team, so that means we like to help people with their problems if they think they have a paranormal issue going on in their homes or wherever they think they might have it. And because we are 45 members strong, we're able to we're all over California. We're spread all over California. So no matter where you're at, we can get you help. Okay. Also, we have people in Spokane and Nevada and Hawaii as well that can help you out. Anyhow, welcome tonight. We have a very interesting show in that we've been trying to get this gentleman on for some time. Finally got him to agree to come on. I had to bribe him. No, I'm kidding. But finally got him to agree to come on. Phantom phone calls. You know, there's a lot of stories about people that die and as they're and after the alleged time that they passed away, family members get phone calls from them or they get text messages on their phones from them. So my guest tonight, William J. Hall is going to talk to us about that. He wrote a book. He co-wrote a book about that. So he's going to be on to talk about us. Okay. In the meantime, if you're watching from Facebook, please hit that follow button. If you're watching from YouTube, please subscribe. And the way to do that is there's a little ghost down in the bottom right-hand corner. Let's see if I can point at him. That's my left. It's weird because it's opposite. Whatever. Anyway, the bottom it's confusing. The bottom right-hand corner, and he's got a magnifying glass on and a Sherlock Holmes hat on. And that ghost is our mascot. And you click on that, and you will subscribe to all of our videos over on YouTube, even though you can go over there anyway. But by subscribing, you get updates right away. When we put a video out, so you'll have that information come to you. And we're looking for subscribers. The more the merrier, especially with YouTube. So I'd appreciate it if you could subscribe if you're watching from YouTube. Same thing goes for watching from Facebook or watching from TikTok or Twitter or any place. Just to subscribe and follow. Follow us. Please follow. Please follow. Anyhow, I'm going to be teaching a ghost, not a ghost 21 class. It's been a long day. I'm going to be teaching a psychic development class, basic class, and I'm also going to be teaching a psychic development class, second level class. And that's coming up, and please be on the lookout. I will have that up on the meetup, at the California Haunts meetup, as well as over at the website. So it's very, very, very soon here, once I pick a date, okay? And there's a description of what the classes are and everything, so you guys will know what you're getting into. All right. Anyway, this is going to be a phone call interview today with Mr. Hall, and I'm ready. I got his phone number, and so without further ado, let's talk about phone calls from the dead. And I want to know in the chat room, because I'm very interactive with the chat room, have any of you had any experiences with phantom phone calls? I've had weird things happen, but not with the phone. I can honestly say that. But I just want to know if any of you have had any strange experiences. Let me check the chat room real quick. See who's here. I see Nancy's here, Jerry's here, Maurice is here, so we got a good start. Pamela's here, so we got a good launch on the chat room. Anyway, I want to know, in the chat room, if you guys have had any, phantom phone calls, and we'll discuss that too. And feel free to ask questions during the show for the guest. And, okay, let me get back in here. Okay, so let me get William on the phone. I still say we need dialing music. I say that every time. It's been 3 years. I say the same thing every night. We need every time I do this. We need dialing music.
Hello.
Hello, William. How are you?
Good.
Let me get you over in the spot here.
Okay.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Fantastic. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, sir?
years, and that's how I get into the paranormal, by investigating those sort of things, and heavily into UFOs in the old days, and then into the paranormal. And the big case I researched was the Bridgeport Poltergeist, which was my first book, and then from there I kept going. But sorry, I should have expected that question. I did write my bio, darn it.
It's not a problem. It's not a problem. Now, you've written books on the Bridgeport, or you wrote a book on the Bridgeport case. But the book that really stood out to me was Phantom Phone Call or Phantom Messages. How did you go about getting involved with writing that?
Oh yeah, well yeah, Jimmy and I wrote that book, and fine talking about that. That I know you were interested in that. That's perfectly fine.
Okay, great. So tell me a little bit about Phantom Phone Calls. I know there's been cases, I've seen them on TV, stuff where people will get, like there's a big train wreck or something, and then somebody will get a phone call from a loved one that had died in this train wreck.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the fascinating cases in there. The idea of phantom messages was to take a look and isolate these cases where you have these odd, impossible phone calls, letters, emails, texts. And what we were looking for were the unexpected ones, not, hey, I'm a paranormal investigator and I went in and I got this recording. We didn't want that, although there's some of that, there's some of that that's unavoidable, but the cases we were really focused on were cases of where it not only was unexplainable, but it was unexpected. These were cases we wanted to look at and say, has anyone really looked at just phantom messages? Phone calls from the dead, of course, has been looked at, and there's been some great work. Our book, the focus was saying, let's just take a look at the phantom messages.
Sure.
And it's about 60-40. The exact percents are in my book, but the point was, how do we get this so that we can take a look and say, hey, these, about half, roughly it's 50-50, 60-40, thereabouts, where it was just phantom messages. There was no haunting. And then in other cases, there was a haunting, but there was similarities between what the phantom messages, how they operate, things like that. And that's what was fascinating to us. And what I would say would be our contribution is to try to look at phantom messages that were unexpected for the most part, in most cases, unexpected, not looking for it. Sometimes they were isolated, and it includes a myriad of cases, and of all the strange ways that these messages are sent, and then of course we ask the questions of what do they mean and what are they, and who are they from, which everyone wants to know.
When you talk about like phantom messages, like you say, what type of messages are we talking about? What are they sent through?
Well, some bizarre ones are, it could be anything. Could be one from your future self. It could be one of the most startling ones was a prediction of 9/11, which was a recording of sounds just sent to or David's cell phone, just getting these recordings about a month before the towers went down. And the recording was a sound that brought him to terror, and even other people he let listen to it were really taken aback by it. It was really David Fritz. I'll never forget talking to him. It happened about a month before 9/11, and this guy, solid character, works as an alcohol drug addiction counselor, Cape Cod, and he kept receiving a call on his cell phone that went straight to voicemail. And when he listened to it, he heard, metal clanging. He just, it brought terror down. He couldn't even hardly listen to it, and he kept getting the message, and he ended up switching phones, switching carriers, and the last message, it stopped when he switched carriers, and then it started again. And the last one he received was the morning of September 10th, 2001. And then the towers came down, and he knew. He had some other people listen to it, the message, friends, without saying anything, and they responded with not well at all. One lady, I think she had fainted, if I remember right. But so these phantom messages come in ways that are like very clearly words, or they can be like that, a recording of a living event that's happening, an event from the future that's happening. Now, is that what it was? Who knows? But I'll tell you, based on the way he reacted to those messages and what they were from, he was not looking to find a tie to any of those things. It was just so obvious to him because he had felt it, and it felt like you lived it when you heard it. And that actually, not to go too deep down the rabbit hole, but that's a type of phantom message that is fascinating, which is the recording of a living event. Where you get the phone call and you hear a captain of a crew in distress, and they're in a storm or something, and it's not just somebody playing something on TV to you. It's something that instinctively you realize is real. That's the interesting thing about these, from the call aspect, is people know, people hear TV in the background all the time, but when calls, that kind of phantom call or message is made, people instinctively know it's real. They instinctively know something's very off. It sounds like it really is a Mayday from that kind of ship. The same way it sounds like it really is 9/11 happening. And who was this strange call? And he tried to research the number to the call, and in all these cases, we find that it doesn't matter whether it's a phone call or a computer. It doesn't matter the technology. The communication does happen, and it doesn't need to be technology. But I think technology frequency is, of course, what we often talk about, and I think that's a case where frequency plays a big part. But they do text messages, and will communicate by letter, and all the traditional ways that we've heard of.
How frequent does this happen, do you think?
I think it's not uncommon in actual hauntings. I think just phantom messages by large. It's hard to tell because, of course, the data, you never get the data. Like, we looked at about 59 cases. We looked at a lot more that didn't get into the book. How prevalent, I'm sure most of them aren't reported. It could be as much as 20% of a certain population. Who knows? I'm just guessing.
Right.
It's hard to tell. It's very, very common within hauntings, but it is very fascinating when there's no haunting or anything happening, and it's just a loved one dies, and you keep getting voice messages from the person every day at 4 p.m., same time that mom always called. Mom's calling and talking to you as if she's not dead, and that's pretty freaky. And it's dangerous for us to assume it's mom too.
Right.
Although at times we can say, well, in this case, I know it, or and I'm not trying to say it's not mom either. We just we have to be careful about believing everything we hear.
Right.
We don't believe it from our politicians, yet when an entity says it, we all of a sudden believe everything they say. So we also found in a lot of these cases that could very well be the case. The trickster element, the element of that, is prevalent. It's kind of like with the Ouija board. Do you expect to get all the best entities, running to come talk to you, or do you expect maybe the troublemakers, the tricksters, you know what I mean? They usually come first, and that's somewhat anecdotal, of course. course. Obviously, it depends on the energy going on in the house, but the bottom line is the mechanics of the way it works is simply that. It is, of course, all frequency driven, as I'm sure you know.
Right.
We won't get much disagreement from that, but it is fascinating because it seems like the telephone and computers and all that electronic stuff is, especially with phones, still prevalent, but even with cell phones, but it goes far beyond that.
I find this interesting because I know I never got to investigate it before they tore it down, but I believe it was the High Sierra in Lake Tahoe. And I remember the reports because Marilyn Monroe had stayed there, and a few others. And there was one particular room where they claimed that Marilyn Monroe would call on a phone.
Oh, wow.
I wish I would have had the chance to investigate up there, but I never got up there. But that's kind of interesting. That's why this whole subject interests me.
Yeah, it really is fascinating. And it's weird, we group them separately, like there's an extraterrestrial famous component where you have the phone calls with the robotic, lifeless kind of person asking stupid survey questions and, trying to get you not interested in, researching UFOs. And there's a fascinating phantom message that came in. This was after the book was published, and it was two scientists from Israel, I believe it is, and they sent this to me. It was a recording. The two were on the phone. They're and they're part of a United Nations group on UFOs. Evidently, we have one. America isn't quite as forthcoming about UFOs as some of the other countries, which is a little bit weird. But in any event, these two gentlemen were talking on the phone, and it's very typical with what we class as the extraterrestrial call, where the phone gets interrupted. One side hears nothing but static, right? And then the other gets to talk to the voice. And this was recorded. They sent it to me, and it also went through an analysis and determined that it was not robotic, but did not match a human, a voice. But that's what they sent me the report too. That's what the report said, that it's not a robot, but it's unidentifiable. So that's as far as you can go, but that's pretty weird. And when I listened to it, he was really good. He says, "Who are you? Who are you?" He's forcing this thing to answer questions. And the thing says something. It sounds to me like I listen to it. It sounds like a monster. It's no better way to say it. It just sounds like a rah, rah, kind of voice.
Right.
Something like that. I don't know, but it was pretty crazy recording. And if it was an isolated case, you'd say, you can't believe that. But that kind of call is so typical with these phantom messages, even with the Mothman prophecy. When you get into other areas of the paranormal, you still see these phantom messages crop up again and again in the same ways. The same kind of, I believe, same kind of modality, but also the same kind of, use. Well, basically modality, use of frequency, and they evidently know how to communicate by latching onto either an etch-a-sketch or a piece of paper or the walls or anything, as we see in all the various cases around.
Now, being a magician, that puts you in a unique position to be able to debunk a lot of stuff too, doesn't it?
Yes, and most of what I find isn't fraud. Most of it's misunderstanding. So I mean, that's a good thing. If somebody shows you a picture of a UFO, it's today it's less likely that it's just a good person who's fascinated, think they caught something, and follows this. And they don't know that what they're looking at is not a UFO. I come across that far more often, or somebody that says, I think this is my sister, she's coming to send me a message of love, and then you say, well, do you really want to know the truth? And then you let them know it's a reflection, or whatever the case may be. But I find it's a good thing. I thought it was going to be a lot. The only place of debunking that you run into is like telekinesis. I've never seen any telekinetic demonstration that wasn't easily debunked. That aside, the people who are involved in the research, the people who are spending hours at time in abandoned buildings, these aren't people who are trying to commit fraud. Most of them, when they do commit fraud, that's when it gets to the Hollywood level, and then they don't have any choice anyhow. So once you sign the contract, you can't really blame them either, because TV has to go on. But
right.
You'll find stuff there that's fraudulent on purpose. That's Hollywood. But by and large, I have found that it's helped me more in my thought process, and it's helped me more help others with misinterpretations. And that goes for me too. I mean, we're all human. We're all prone to that. I've been in places that I know are haunted, in our common term. I know that they're a portal and that there's tons of stuff happening, but my photos are still subject to the normal photo misinterpretations. And so I would take photos that I would think were real. And why? Well, geez, I'm in a house full of activity, right?
Right.
But the reality is they're still not real paranormal pictures. They're still, not all of them, I'm saying I still had to look and say, no. Just because you're in a haunted place doesn't mean you're still not going to get the regular reflection. So it's a really hard job, that's why I don't put down people who do, mistake photos for other things. It's a really hard job. It's a hard job to do.
Now, going back to the fact that you're a magician on this, when you look at these like phantom phone calls, for instance, from cell phones, I mean, there's people that debunk it, saying, well, it's just a delay on the cell phone because some cell phone carriers don't deliver the messages fast enough. How do you feel about that? I mean, what's your views on that kind of thing?
Yes, well, I think it's easy to make explanations without context. So a delay in one message is one thing, but when the person's getting a call at 4 p.m. every day from their dead mother, and they're talking to the dead mother, or when they're receiving the message, and it's not just one message, but it's multiple messages. Now how do you explain it? You know what I mean? So I agree. If there's a case that has one message that comes through, you can argue. Yeah, you always have to argue. Delay in delivery, that kind of thing. Yes. But when it's 4 calls, 5 calls, when the content of the call reveals information that, is unique, you have to look at the details. You can't broad brush it and sweep it under the carpet. That to me and to most people is investigation by proclamation. The late great Stan Friedman used to say, I don't need to research. I'm already convinced myself the answer. So it's hard to really debunk those things. It's hard to prove them too. I mean, we've had experts, for phantom messages. We said, how could this happen technically? And but who do you ask? You can go to the people who you think are the best tech people around, but still, I mean, what do they know about this? And most of them that we've talked to would say, no, you can't do that. No, this can't happen. But if you look at the context of the cases, it's not just a mere message we're talking about. We're talking about the context of the messages or the emails that are sent after the person dies. And these emails give away information that no one really knew about. Except for the one, there's a case, Jack Therese, where after this, he was younger, and after he had died, they're getting emails from his account. Well, I mean, and it doesn't make any sense. You know, like who would do that? Who would get into his account? And then it mentioned about a meeting in an attic he had with a friend of his. They were going to maybe fix up the attic, and he was commenting that the attic was so dirty. And only the two of them had that conversation. And the friend Tim, he didn't go around telling people that. And then all of a sudden, that's in the email, and there's other stuff in the email, and you know, they don't know. I mean, how do you can't prove from an email that it's him, but it's almost the best explanation would be he faked his death and sent the emails.
Right.
You know, it's because it's bizarre. I don't think he did that, but it's a bizarre case. And, you know, does the family think it's really him? Well, some do, some don't know. But they think it's nice that they would be nice it was him, you know. But who would do that?
Right.
You know, who would break into his account, and who even knew about, you know, it's just, the whole thing was bizarre with no motive. So once you look at the context of them, it gets interesting. And in the book we label, you know, if something has no witnesses, that's interesting and still, you know, should be part of the story. But there's, you know, most of the cases in our book, I think it was over 70% had witnesses. And when you have multiple people, you know, getting involved in these things, you know, like the 9/11 calls, somebody can say, you know, so what, he just got a call where it made some noise, you know. But it's more than that. You know, when somebody faints to a phone call, and, you know, we're talking about things that have impact that's unlike a normal call. You know, it stands out from the rest by far, and all of these types of the fearful types of those calls, you know, all end up with the listener just instinctively knowing that what they're listening to is not, you know, a TV or radio or prank call, that this is real life. And, you know, that's what all these communications have one thing in common. Well, they have multiple things in common, but one of the things that's fascinating is the time element. You know, are they predicting the future? And is it a prediction? You know, are we predicting the future, or are they just looking past? You know, again, if you're transversing these things, and I don't know, you know, sometimes they do it on purpose. Sometimes, you know, we think it's an accident. We don't know. But, you know, that's a fascinating aspect too.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you next. Is what, you know, like somebody that, say, is in an accident, is there a general certain type of call that they make to the family after they die?
Yeah, you know, the train crash was an interesting one. It's a case that made the news. It was Charles Peck. He called. It was something like, yeah, it was like 35 phone calls he made, and they weren't calls. You know, they weren't calls that you know, the people he called all the time. But what was it? And they never found his. I think they never found his body. I got to look at that. But the engineer actually, ironically, was texting, and he failed to yield to a signal, and so the train ends up on the other side of the tracks. It was horrible. And Charles Peck, he was. It's sad. He was getting married. He was moving for a new job. That alone is sad part of the story. And it took him like 12 hours to recover Charles' body from the wreckage. But for 2 hours before that, his cell made call after call to loved ones. Now, what's fascinating about this is, you know, they said that he was in the front car. He would have been dead, like, on impact. There's no way he could have been alive during that time. But the weird part is his phone called only his loved ones. So you know how you'd have the dentist, the barber, the mechanic. You got all these people in your contacts. but all the phone calls that happened during that time when he had to be dead were all outbound calls from his own cell phone, and they were only to the loved ones, So you could say maybe it's something mechanical if it went to, Bob the mechanic and Bill Hall. Bill Hall's a good friend. Bob the mechanic just got called because there's something mechanical that happened with his phone or whatever. But we're talking about only his loved ones were called. Those were the only calls. There was no hairdresser or whatever. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so that makes it oddly specific. When you look at that, where his phone went, it called his son, his brother, his sister, of course his fiance. I think it was his fiance at the time. A friend who lived in the same complex. 35 calls made when they said he had to be dead. There's no way. And whenever they answered, they heard static again. And there's always a static, no matter how good the technology is. When it comes to these phantom calls, static ends up being part of it. The frequency interruption, as I would guess. So, they thought maybe he was trapped and using his cell phone, to call to get help.
Right.
But after they found his body and everything, the rescue crew, they found his body around midnight. It was about an hour after the call stopped. But they said based on his injuries, he died on contact. He was not alive during that time. So it made all those calls and only to loved ones. But that, to me, that's not your top level of phantom message, right? Because we still have to make assumptions.
Right.
And but it's a fascinating case. Nevertheless, it's not one that I would say stop everything for. But when you put it together with all the other phantom messages, you see a trend of how these things operate, the static interference, that sometimes the cell phones do call after people die, although it's rare. And we don't have enough of it to know enough data on it to really get at it. But, they are fascinating. I think they could be put in the same realm as other entities of sometimes not knowing the origin of these things or who they're really from. In the case of Charles Peck, we have a mechanical device as the only communicator, but we also have to add static. So that static's an important element. So, we tried to look at the cases that way too. Some of the elements have, many witnesses, and it's more an open and shut case of something really is happening. Bizarre.
When I hear this, excuse me, it makes me wonder too about, how like people will get that last burst of energy. Because I know as a paranormal investigator, even to have, a blip on a meter, the entity has to put out a lot of energy to do that, to create that blip. So I'm wondering if, this is just a burst, they die, maybe they don't realize they're gone, and this is a massive burst of energy to operate these phones and computers or whatever, because it would take a lot of energy to do that.
Yeah, you wonder, because it seems the phone is definitely, it's not the most popular, but it's a favorite.
Right.
The interruption, the static, same thing. We had a case with a TV, and computers, and now cell phones, prior to that, regular phones, and then letters too. But I agree with you, like the ones that had letters and writing on the wall, those cases, I can't say all of them, but I know a few I'm thinking of. They were big haunts. There was a lot of energy going on there. Other cases where it's just a message being communicated, it often will be the phone call, which would make sense. The less energy to output. If it's a full-on haunt, then you'd have some of the weirder stuff like a letter in the mailbox, which was a case from an investigation that we did in Litchfield, where they actually have letters with like a scrawled pencil thing. I mean, unbelievable stuff. But that was part of basically a house that was in the middle of a portal, if you will. So. But I agree. It seems, especially all the ones related to UFOs or entities or the weird surveyors and everything, they tend to really favor phone call like nothing else.
Absolutely. Now, you just piqued my interest on this because, all the years I've been doing paranormal investigations, I've never once come across anything that had anything to do with a letter. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Matter of fact, I think it's the case is in the time slip chapter. Although so many of them have a fascinating time slip, component to them. But let me just see here.
Okay, cool.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? I was trying to figure out what.
Oh no, cool. I just said cool. That's cool. I'd like to know a little bit more about the letters because that really intrigues me.
Oh, the letters.
Yes, sir.
Well, this one of the letter cases was in the middle of. This house is definitely it's like a paranormal circus. My second book was done on it, Haunted House Diaries. That was an active investigation, and they had. It was bizarre because. They were thinking of calling this will bring up another fascinating subcategory of phantom messages. They were thinking about calling friends they hadn't seen in a while to get together, and they went out there. They were going to call, didn't get a chance to call, and then they get a letter in their mailbox to stop by to see you. From those same people, and the message is very bizarre, all about time, kind of like the Mothman prophecies, where those notes in that case, where they show up, we had these messages for you from the hotel, telling knowing all sorts of things, and that's how a lot of these messages operate. Almost like they're playing with us. Some of it looks like even predicting the future, but I wonder if it's just viewing the past, and not on a linear timeline like we are. But I find with cases of letters, it's usually there's a big haunt going on at the same time.
Interesting. And so these letters are like real letters. I mean, they're not like patchy things or anything. They're just well written out and everything.
Yes, it was a piece of paper, and it was scrawled on like with pencil.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like some psycho wrote it. And they wouldn't have believed, but they signed it. Claire and Bob, or they signed it. But it was like it didn't look like. Like I hate to say like a human handwriting, but that's
right.
Look how a kid did it almost. So yeah, very very bizarre. It's almost like if we're in the right place, so to speak, anything is possible. But even with the haunts, we see sometimes they go for an etch-a-sketch, simple message, or disturbing, poltergeist kind of activity.
Mm-hmm.
But even with poltergeist, we get phantom messages. So that was the idea of the book, is to look at all of them, and a lot of the fascinating ones have nothing else going on. The phone calls that never happen are fascinating. That's where you're going to make a phone call.
Mm-hmm.
You never got around to it, yet the person calls you up and says they got your message.
Whoa.
Now,
okay.
one would say, oh, well, maybe the investigator is off his rocker and forgot and did make the call. But this is something that we found prevalent with a lot of these calls. These are not simple people that just kind of forgot they made a call. These are people who are going to make a phone call, did not make the phone call, but the phone call got there. And sometimes even with a slightly different message, like you made a decision that you didn't make yet, but the phone call had the message in it with the decision, that kind of thing.
Right.
That happened in the Mothman prophecies also, as well as other cases. So it's hard to place. You know, we think, as my dear friend Paulino says, if we see it outside, it's extraterrestrial. If we see it inside, it's a ghost. He's being facetious because, you know, we know better. But sometimes it is tough to tell what's what. And I think these entities could be many different entities, but I think they all do use the same kind of phantom messages in their own way. Even some that are good or more playful or helpful, because you know there's all of those too in the mix. I think their personalities are as varied as ours, which means, you know, who knows, maybe they're human or maybe not, but or they pretend well. There's a mixture of just about everything in there.
Now, do you hear? I know that there have been cases that I'm going to go back to a book I read a long time ago on the air here, The Ghost of Flight 401, where at the point of impact during the airline crash, this guy's family that was standing at the gate heard a whistle, and it was his whistle, as if he was coming home. Have you come across cases like that? I mean, you know, I guess he was telling me he was all right.
Yes, yeah, and a lot of these cases, and this is of course my theory. Who am I? But it does appear that we're not seeing residual. We're not seeing people who are dead. We're seeing people who are actually living, carrying out whatever they're doing, and they're doing it in a different multiverse or different universe. It's not my own theory. It's not one that I've started. It's a popular one, not with everyone. Some people want to insist that it's a residual kind of haunting.
Right.
Yet I would argue in Gettysburg, because residual hauntings, I know we've broken them. So if they can break residual haunting, I don't think it's really residual. But I only make that assumption based on interactions with entities and all these cases too that point out. A lady was standing there combing her hair in the mirror. She wasn't even paying attention to me. Yeah, because she's combing her hair in the mirror. You know, she's not dead. She's combing her hair in the mirror because she's going to go out for real in her universe. You know,
right?
And we know that the living can haunt the living, so we know they don't have to be dead. In other words, there's cases where somebody has a dream, but really they're haunting someone else in their house during their dream. They're an actual entity that's seen by the people, and they're rare cases, but in some cases the two meet because the house isn't that far apart, and the person that's been haunting them is the girl that lives literally next door. Not next door, but you know.
Right.
And so now you have a case of well, you can't say a ghost has to be a dead person because that person dreamed it was alive. Right. So but then I'm open it to being all three. I'm open it to something to being I don't quite follow the residual argument, but you know, I'm not out to kill anybody over it.
I gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, I try to keep an open mind, but I think from what I've seen, that entities behave as if they're not dead because they're not.
Right. Well, it sounds like what you're talking about when you talk about the living haunting the living. You know, it's like someone with psychic abilities that doesn't realize they have them or realize they're as strong as they are. And when they go to sleep at night or whatever, they're able to project themselves into somebody else's dreams.
Right. Well, this wasn't even into dream. This was into their living room.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean,
that's fascinating too. I mean, obviously that's as powerful. But yeah, it's funny. I mean, she was literally going down the steps, and they would see her and kind of freak out, and then she would freak out. That was the haunting episode.
That's funny.
Two people scaring each other, and boy, when she showed up at their door, their faces were they were relieved afterwards to realize she wasn't dead and wasn't going to haunt them forever. Because of course, once the two met, it luckily had stopped, but. But they would have been okay if it continued now that they knew it was some girl who had sleep problems that lived a few blocks away.
Right,
you know?
right. But
what are the chances? Most of those cases, the two never meet each other, so you've got probably people doing exorcisms until the poor lady or guy
right.
gets some help with their sleep.
But to me, see, that leads to asking the right questions, too, as an investigator. Because with the lady that they're saying, if she is alive, then there might be some emotional issues going on there to where she's upset at night or whatever, and she's projecting herself out.
Right. There's so much we have to take into account. It's definitely good to point that out. Yeah. Sometimes I summarize and you summarize, but yeah, there's a lot of details that we have to overcome before we even get to the haunted part.
Yeah, and that's what people don't realize about these cases is there's a lot more that goes on than on TV. Where there's a lot more information that as investigators we'll have to gather in order to put the puzzle together.
Oh yeah, and even when it's compelling, sometimes there's a photo in my second book that I would take out. We've learned what it was. It looked like an apparition going through a portal. Mm-hmm. And I interviewed the family separately, and they all identified the lady as the same lady. And it looked unbelievable. And my head optics expert looked at it, and he concluded that it was that the ring, the portal, was a reflection from the ornate mirror. Mm-hmm. And so we went to recreate it with the actual mirror. He was able to recreate the effect, but he didn't know about the lady. The lady, of course, was pretty wild. It really looked like a lady. But then I was going through some pictures of the house, probably years later, and I noticed that in the picture, the real picture, the big picture, had a carousel horse there.
Oh.
Yeah, a life-size carousel horse. The daughter loved horses, and so had a giant. And the mane of that horse caused a reflection into the mirror mm-hmm. that looked just like a lady.
Wow.
Just like a lady. And it's in my second book, and every time I lecture and hold up the book, I'll say, that picture, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. But I always say, you can say, this is unexplainable, or this is crazy, or whatever. I never can say, look at what I caught.
Right.
I could say that, but I try not to. I say, look, here's the figure here. Look at this. This looks, this is what I'm seeing. But the most you can say with a photo is it's unexplained. The problem is you're not there. That's a big problem. Now, if you were there and took the photo, now mm-hmm. I'm more impressed. Mm-hmm. If you saw it with your eyes and you took a photo, then if I can trust you, then we can talk,
Sure.
But otherwise, you just see a photo, you're limited by the field of vision of the camera. So all you can do is say it doesn't appear that there's special effects, but you can't say something's a UFO or something's a phantom message unless you have better proof. And we did have, we had to exclude a lot of interesting cases that simply didn't have enough to them. There, could be this, could be that kind of thing.
Now with these phantom messages now, is it a mixed bag of what's coming through? Like, I mean, is some of it reassuring for family members, or is, like you say, warnings, like with the September 11th thing?
Well, there's an entire chapter of people who, loved ones who pop in to say hello. Someone who helped to a guy, nobody knew he was hurt, but he was hurt, and he didn't really tell anyone. And kind of the the family relative kind of spilled the beans on them and, got them help. And so there are definitely the warmer stories.
Mm-hmm.
We have a chapter on them. No, they're not all, they run the gamut. And there are some heartwarming stories. Continuous phone call from an extension that's no longer live, but it was his dad's work phone,
Mm-hmm.
beautiful little things like that. Varying levels of proof, some that are just like what I told you, the phone doesn't exist, but it
Right.
made calls.
Right.
You can't risk your reputation on it, but the person's not a liar, and it's part of the data, and then we just look at it all. And others has incredible proof of multiple levels, multiple witnesses, multiple, or you have phone call evidence where it's been
Right.
recorded, and that's fascinating. There's an elementary school in Michigan. It was a local preschool, and the thing is so haunted, and it likes to send messages. If you go away on vacation, it controls the phones in the office. It's unbelievable, and it'll say their name like in an unnatural, robotic kind of voice, and
Mm-hmm.
and I was sent some of those recordings, but it doesn't do any harm. It sometimes calls the varying people there and just says their name. It's the most bizarre thing, and it's all been investigated, but it displays zeros as the origination number. It makes outgoing calls from other phones, doctors' offices, other places receive calls from the other office phones, that none of the employees made,
Right.
And, the phone company is confused, and it's they have a name for they call him George, and he's very active when they leave for holiday breaks. He doesn't like that. And then when they come back, they find messages on their phones. And, the numbers don't work when they call back. And no following anyone home or attachments. And there was some other activity going on there. But, but they have just an entity at the place, and, they go on vacation, or, there's the school vacation. They leave messages. Everybody places. There was an older. I think it was called a poltergeist case. I think it was a poltergeist case where they were getting billed because it was in those days they were calling Big Ben the time thing, and I guess they charged for it, and it was calling like at such a rate you couldn't even humanly call.
Huh.
You couldn't make that many phone calls, and that's how they got it taken off their bill, because they were receiving a bill for their office making all the phone calls, and it is making all these other phone calls from their office. So sometimes when there's it's rare, but you have a total takedown of the phone system. There's only a few cases like that I know of, but this is one of them. The one in Phantom Messages.
Mm-hmm.
That's more playful. That's more of a neutral, not really, angry or that kind of thing.
Right.
Maybe a little childish, or missing them when they go away, or whatever you want to call that. But it's definitely in the playful category. And even the other one years ago, that one was playful too. I mean, it may not have even been intentional. Calling that number that many times could have been some sort of frequency. Who the heck knows?
Right.
That definitely is fascinating.
Now, something that I've been thinking about too during this interview is, what's the duration of these things? I'm not talking about the phone calls themselves, but I mean, can they last like one call or up to multiple calls in like years, or how's that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Most aren't that long, but there have been some that have lasted years, or a year, close to a year. And as far as messages, well, the Dodlinson incident had over 300 messages, but but I would say most are a few messages, sometimes only one, but a few is common. I think the context of how it happens and what is happening, because it's unexpected communication, so it goes from outbound calls to calls between cell phones, so it really covers the gamut. Emails too, of course, as we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by context, like in the case of Ida Lupino, which is in our kind of famous people chapter,
Right.
that was the uncle calling a few times. The child answered the phone, gave the message to the grandmother. The grandmother talked to Albert, but there was a problem. Albert was already dead.
Wow.
So these were live phone calls. So the daughter had the phone call, said, "Oh yeah, uncle, whatever." I said, "Albert, I should check the name," but said, "Yeah, he's sick or needs help." But he was already dead 3 days before, and they only had that information when I don't know if the grandmother figured it out or if it went the husband and wife who were they were all in showbiz, and then they get the news that Albert called and he was sounded sick and they're like, "Oh, what do you mean he died 3 days ago?" These are live phone calls. These weren't messages left on an answer machine that could be delayed, and this was of course not in cell phone age even,
right.
But it doesn't matter. So when you look at the context, then that brings up then the answer is yes, some are long, but even though that wasn't long, that was and the content of the message and the context of that takes it to a whole another level.
Absolutely. I just find all this interesting, especially when you talk about emails. And I mean, like, someone would have to literally press into a computer to even send the email, and that fascinates me.
Yes, they, tablets and the messages were like an early 16th century writing,
right?
And they were done instantly. I mean, as fast as conversation. Which is why in that case we discovered the person doesn't need to be typing on the keypads. It appears whatever they're saying is coming on the keyboard. But
right.
That's a whole can of worms. That case that was all about phantom messages.
Right. Right. I had an instance because I have congestive heart failure, and I had an instance of several things that happened, and I know it was my father doing it, and because, before I was diagnosed, because he had congestive heart failure. And one of the things that struck me as odd was that I had, like everybody else, I don't use them out in the field, but those silly apps that you have on your cell phone to communicate and all that. They can talk back, like the EVP apps. Well, I had one on my phone, and the phone, of course, was to the regular home screen, and I was doing some work on my laptop, and the message came through that said, "Go to hospital."
Oh, wow.
And I thought, that's really weird, because whoever it is or whatever it was would have had to physically, manipulate the phone to even open up the app to send the message.
You see, you would have made it into the book.
See? I would have made it in the book.
But that's a good example of what I would call like a level one. We didn't have levels, but that's a story that's, okay, I believe you.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it's weird as hell. We can argue it's a coincidence or, mechanical, but it's still cool as hell.
Right.
However you want to say it, when you start collecting all of these, you can't discount, like I had the experience in the graveyard, was it real? I put it in the book and I was honest in saying, I don't know, but let me tell you, it was very, if it was coincidental, it was darn coincidental,
Well, yeah, and then mine was coupled with a couple other things that went on. Like, he sat at his we had a breakfast bar, and he sat in the same spot for years and years and years. And there was always a light bulb above where he sat. And this is around the same time that I got the phone, the thing on the phone. and the light above where he sat started blinking. And it would never stay on. It would never stay lit. I put new bulbs in there. It would never stay lit. And there was nothing wrong with the wiring, right? So I thought, okay, well, that's kind of weird. So then when I go to have one of my tests done, where they're going to put stuff, into your blood system to see how your stuff's flowing, I was having trouble because my heart would always race. So I'm sitting there in the little waiting room thing, little cubicle, and my dad was a big band aficionado. And I'm sitting there and I'm listening to a pop station, right? And all of a sudden the music changes. And it's my dad's favorite song.
Wow.
And that's when I knew, and I thought,
now you have multiple elements.
Yeah, and I thought, oh my God, my dad's been trying to contact me. Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah, and and we don't know.
Yeah.
Like in a lot of cases they're playing tricks, in other cases, who can argue? I prefer to think it's him.
Yep, I do too.
You got a few elements going on there. That's what I mean by levels is, when you have multiple elements, because when you have the one, sometimes it doesn't give you enough information. It leaves you hanging and you're like, well, what does this mean? But if you have the one thing, then something else, you got something else. Maybe you don't even have a full haunt, but you have a fuller picture.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, that's like three things.
Yeah.
But we have a case in the book where it was a radio breakthrough, and a lady swears it said it was a voice yelling, stop, and saved her life from going over the railroad tracks. Now, and she swears this was not in her head.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, look, this was not, this is what happened. And the way she explains it, it's like, yeah, I believe it happened, because there are other cases of breakthroughs of a radio station.
Right.
Again, the static, the breakthrough, whether it's radio, phone, CB radio, cell phone,
right,
piece of paper, email, you name it. And the early compute TVs, we had a few TV takeover cases that were interesting. But yeah, it looks like they're of course big into the frequencies, especially on the whatever you believe with the Men in Black or the robotic calls.
Right.
They seem to prefer phone calls, probably because nobody was letting them in when they went door to door. They're too freaky. They're like, we can't do door to door. We do worse than telemarketers. So
right. Right. When you talk about the TV stuff, I believe that. I did a case probably about 20 years ago where the child would try to watch her cartoons, and the TV would always change the channels that the grandmother liked.
Oh my God. Kid's worst nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was crazy. Just crazy stuff going on like that. So,
Jimmy, my co-author, one of the cases in the book about the haunted cable box. This cable box that would go to whatever one that they said, they had a whole system with it, and talk back to them using channels and numbers. It was really freaky. But yeah, radio, whether it's going to a particular station, turning on and off by itself,
right.
We've all those kinds of things we've seen. Phantom messages was an attempt to just cull all of those messages that we get and make sense of them. And they're definitely predicting the future, which I don't like to use the term prediction, because again, what if they're just looking back at what happened? Mm-hmm. If they're looking back at what happened, they could easily predict the future and look like gods when really they're not. They don't have to have that advancement at all, really.
Right.
But who knows? Could be a bit of both, right? Doesn't have to be one answer. That's what I always say. Sometimes it could be we're both right at different times. You don't really know. But the behaviors, it takes form. And it definitely, some of these messages don't come about because of a horrific accident. Some of these messages just come out of the blue. Like the email, the Jack Froze emails. I think that's how you say his name.
Right.
But, they just come out of nowhere. Just people didn't expect it, and this is what happened. Like the uncle
right.
call, and that story saying, he's sick, he has to talk to the parents, but he's been dead for 3 days.
Absolutely.
Yep. And there's and then you see similarities with cases like that. And a call from the future self is one of the they're rare, but they are growing in number, where they receive a phone call from what the person believes is their future self.
Huh.
So I don't think I want to talk to my future self.
No, I don't either. That would creep me out.
Hear what crap I did,
That would creep me out. William, thank you so much for coming on. I've been wanting to get you on for a long time, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm so glad. I had a blast.
I would love to get you on to talk about your other investigation. I would love to.
Sure. We certainly could do that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, sir. And I will advertise your books right before I close the show down, so people know where to get them and which books to get and all that good stuff.
Oh, thank you so much.
All right, sir.
Okay. Take care, everybody.
You have a good evening, and thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right. Bye-bye. Okay. That was fascinating. Every time you get a phone call now that that you call back and says this number's been disconnected, you're going to think twice about it, right? I know I will. But anyway, thanks everybody for coming tonight. I appreciate it. Gosh, I can't say much more about this guest. Like I said, I've been waiting to get him on for a while. We had Ashley was on. Ashley, if you're listening, she did a great job. Going down over some of these messages. She had a website where hang on a second, where she had compiled stories that people had emailed into her website. We had gone over these phantom messages. It's just absolutely fascinating. And like he says, they can come in several different ways. And if that's correct, I'll let you guys know tomorrow. I think it was a High Sierra, with Marilyn Monroe. Probably wrong. I'll look it up to make sure I have it right, so I don't look, raise any cackles for people, investigators. Anyway, if you're watching from Facebook and you like the show, please be sure to follow. If you're watching from YouTube and you like the show, please be sure to subscribe. And there's that little guy, that little ghost down there at the bottom right-hand corner with the magnifying glass and the Sherlock Holmes hat on. I'd really appreciate it. I really would appreciate it. If you watch from TikTok, that too, that kind of thing. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about Erie, Florida, creepy things in the state of Florida. And some of them even include a Bigfoot-like individual. So we're going to be talking about that with Mark Muncy tomorrow. He was supposed to be on a couple weeks ago and something came up, but he will be with us tomorrow evening to talk about that stuff. So that's going to be really, really cool. I really appreciate each and every one of you for listening tonight. If you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. I really appreciate it. And again, it's great that you guys are listeners. I really appreciate each and every one of you. What I forgot to do today was run my banner. I don't know why, but it's one of those days. Here we go. I have the banner running, and what that is because California Haunts is technically a nonprofit team. We don't take any money to investigate or anything like that. So we do accept donations, however, because, we have equipment costs just like everybody else, just like internet costs and everything else to keep the show going. And I want to keep the show going, keep guests coming. So if a mic breaks, computer breaks, I have to pay for it out of my pocket because I'm the owner, right? Or if the equipment breaks for the team, I have to pay for it. If you can find it in your heart to help us out a little bit to keep that stuff going, PayPal.me at California Haunts. If you don't like PayPal, prefer Venmo, you can find us over there too at California Haunts. I really appreciate it. Every little bit helps, right? Anyway, I want to thank everybody, and I will see you guys. And let me get this going. Let me move over here. Get the right thing. Buttons. Who's got the buttons? And after I run his information, I will see you guys tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Pacific with Mark Muncy and talk about Erie, Florida. So here we go. Let me run the information for you, and boom, just like that. Phantom Messages is the book we talked about tonight. But again, he has another famous investigation that he did, and that is The World's Most Haunted House. And his other book is The Haunted House Diaries. And of course, you can get all that at Amazon. And please, if you happen to have a TikTok account, we are over on TikTok. We're under California Haunts. So do look us up over at TikTok. We've got some interesting and fun stuff over at TikTok. Anyway, I want to thank you guys. I will see you tomorrow. Have a good evening.